There was once a ruler who held authority over Greeks, Egyptians, Babylonians, and Persians all at the same time, yet none of those peoples felt humiliated or stripped of their identity. That alone sounds almost impossible. Here was a man who expanded his power across the known world, but instead of claiming it as his personal possession, he described it as belonging to the people within it. That idea goes against everything we associate with conquest. History is filled with leaders who took land and imposed control, but very few, if any, chose to share power in a way that preserved dignity. And yet, in this case, it truly happened. What followed was not just another empire, but a transformation of how rule itself could work. The state this man built grew into one of the most influential civilizations the world had ever seen up to that point. It stretched across 3 continents, linking distant cultures into a single system. It introduced administrative methods that still echo in modern governance, often without us even realizing it. And it laid the foundation for what we now recognize as the nation of Iran. This is the story of the Persian Empire, and by the time you reach the end, the ancient world may look very different from how you imagined it before. Because this isn't just a tale of conquest, it's a case study in power, strategy, and a radically different vision of leadership. Surprisingly, it all began in a place that hardly seems suitable for building an empire. Around 2,600 years ago, the lands of present-day Iran were anything but unified. The region was fragmented, filled with competing tribes, small kingdoms, and scattered communities struggling over limited resources. Mountains and deserts shaped daily life, making survival itself a constant challenge. In the northwest lived the Medes, who had established a respectable and growing kingdom. To the south, in a region known as Persis, modern-day Fars, lived the Persians, a closely related people. They were known for their strength and resilience, but at that time they were not in control. They were subjects of the Medes, paying tribute, following orders, and waiting. What no one could have predicted was that from this subordinate position would rise a figure capable of reshaping the entire balance of power. His name was Cyrus the Great, and before we examine what he achieved, it's important to understand the environment he stepped into, because without that context, the magnitude of his actions is easy to underestimate. The world of the 6th century BCE was defined by dominance and fear. Empires ruled through force, and authority was often maintained through harsh control. Power wasn't shared, it was taken, enforced, and rarely questioned. The shadow of Assyria lingered long after its fall. Its reputation for cruelty had carved itself so deeply into the collective memory of the Near East that even generations later, people spoke its name with unease. Fear wasn't just a reaction, it was part of its legacy. Then there was Babylon, a center of culture and military strength, but its brilliance came with a ruthless edge. When it defeated its enemies, it didn't just conquer them, it uprooted entire populations, relocating them to distant lands to erase their identity and prevent rebellion. Control was maintained not only through force, but through calculated disruption of societies. The Medes, too, proved how unforgiving this world could be. When they destroyed Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, they did so with such intensity that it shocked even those accustomed to violence. It was a clear message: power belonged to those willing to use it without restraint. This was the system everyone understood. You conquered, you crushed resistance, you humiliated the defeated, and you carried survivors in chains. It wasn't considered cruel, it was considered normal. In fact, it was the only model of rule most leaders had ever known. And then everything shifted. Around 559 BCE, Cyrus the Great rose to the throne of Persis. He was young, strategic, and, most importantly, different. His approach to power didn't align with the brutal traditions of his time. Where others saw domination as the goal, he saw opportunity in unity. His thinking wasn't just unusual, it was revolutionary. For Cyrus, ruling was not about destruction, it was about integration. He didn't simply defeat opponents, he brought them into his system. Former enemies became partners. Instead of erasing cultures, he allowed them to survive and often supported them. Religious practices, local customs, and traditions were not obstacles to his rule, they were part of it. If that sounds hard to believe, wait until we reach his entry into Babylon, because that moment would redefine what victory could look like. But before that turning point, it's important to understand how Cyrus built his power, step by calculated step. It began with a bold and risky decision: rebellion against the Medes. At the time, this move seemed almost reckless. The Medes were stronger, larger in number, and backed by regional allies. By contrast, Cyrus ruled over a relatively small kingdom with limited resources. On paper, the outcome looked What no one anticipated was the turning point that came from within the Median ranks themselves. In the middle of the campaign, a significant part of the Median army defected and joined Cyrus the Great. Their king, Astyages, had reportedly alienated his own commanders through arrogance and poor leadership. In a matter of moments, he found himself abandoned, without an army and without control. In 550 BCE, Cyrus captured Ecbatana, the Median capital. But instead of leveling the city or exacting revenge, he made a decision that stunned observers. He spared Astyages. He did not parade him in disgrace or execute him as an example. Instead, he treated him as a defeated ruler, firmly removed from power but not stripped of dignity. That kind of restraint was unheard of in that era. And this is where the story begins to challenge expectations. What drives a leader, fully capable of destruction, to choose restraint instead? Was it a calculated political strategy designed to win loyalty? Was it a genuine belief in a different kind of rule? Or was it something more complex, something history still struggles to fully explain? That question lingers as Cyrus continues his expansion. After securing control over the Medes, his attention turned westward to Lydia. Its ruler, Croesus, was legendary for his wealth. In fact, the phrase "rich as Croesus" still echoes through history for a reason. Lydia, located in what is now Turkey, was among the first regions to mint coins, and Croesus had accumulated immense riches that set him apart from every other ruler of his time. Before confronting Cyrus, Croesus sought guidance from the famous oracle of Delphi. The message he received was cryptic. If he crossed the Halys River and attacked Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Confident in his interpretation, Croesus believed victory was guaranteed. The prophecy, however, came true in a very different way. The empire that fell was his own. The campaign moved quickly. Cyrus defeated Croesus at Sardis around 547 BCE, and once again, what followed broke every established norm. According to Greek accounts, Croesus was captured and brought to the brink of execution. But at the last moment, Cyrus intervened. He spared him. More than that, he kept him close, turning the former king into a trusted advisor. Think about that for a moment. The wealthiest man of his age, defeated in battle, was not erased from history. He was integrated into it. In a world defined by elimination, Cyrus practiced inclusion, and that alone set him apart from every other ruler of his time. Now we arrive at the most extraordinary chapter of his reign. Babylon stood as one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, with nearly 1,700 years behind it. Its scale and sophistication were unmatched. The legendary Hanging Gardens, its massive defensive walls, so wide, according to Herodotus, that chariots could pass each other on top, and its towering structures made it a symbol of power and human achievement. Babylon was more than a city. It was a center of knowledge, advancing astronomy, literature, and medicine in ways that shaped civilizations far beyond its borders. And it was here that Cyrus would face his greatest test, not just of military strength, but of his entire philosophy of rule. Babylon was widely seen as the center of the known world, so when Cyrus the Great captured it in 539 BCE, expectations were clear. History had already set the pattern. Cities were looted, temples were burned, and populations were crushed into submission. But what followed defied every expectation. There was no widespread destruction, no mass killings, no campaign of terror. Instead, Cyrus entered the city with a completely different message. He did not present himself as a conqueror. He framed his arrival as an act of liberation. In a symbolic gesture, he paid respect to Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, signaling that local beliefs would not be threatened under his rule. Then came a decision that had no real precedent in the ancient world. Cyrus ordered the release of entire communities that had been forcibly displaced by previous rulers. Among them were the Jewish exiles, people who had spent decades in captivity, longing to return to Jerusalem. He not only allowed them to go back, but also returned sacred objects taken from the Temple of Solomon and supported the rebuilding of their place of worship. And after doing all of this, he simply moved on. This moment left such a deep impression that it was recorded in the book of Isaiah, where Cyrus is described in extraordinary terms as a chosen instrument of God. In fact, he is the only foreign ruler in the biblical narrative to be given a title comparable to a Messiah. A Persian king who did not follow the God of Israel was still recognized by Hebrew prophets as a figure serving a divine purpose. That level of recognition doesn't happen by chance. It happened because Cyrus broke the established rules of conquest. He treated conquered populations not as defeated enemies, but as communities with rights, beliefs, and identity. Archaeological evidence reinforces this image. The Cyrus cylinder, discovered in Babylon in the 19th century, records his governing principles. Some scholars describe it as the earliest expression of human rights. Others argue that this interpretation imposes modern ideas onto an ancient context. But regardless of the debate, the text clearly promotes religious tolerance, respect for local traditions, and a rejection of forced displacement, ideas that were remarkably advanced for the 6th century BCE. And so, the central question remains unresolved. Was Cyrus simply a brilliant strategist who understood that respect and stability were more effective than fear? Or did he genuinely believe in a different vision of leadership, one rooted in human dignity? There is no definitive answer, and that uncertainty is exactly what keeps his legacy alive in the minds of historians, philosophers, and political thinkers more than 2,500 years later. Cyrus died in 530 BCE during a military campaign in Central Asia, fighting the Massagetae. Accounts of his death vary. The historian Herodotus recounts a dramatic version, that the queen, Tamiris, whose son had fallen victim to a siren trap, defeated Cyrus in battle. According to the story, she later found his body and, in an act of symbolic vengeance, placed his head in a container of blood, declaring that he should finally have his fill of what he had long sought. Whether that account is legend or fact remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that Cyrus died on the battlefield and that he left behind something extraordinary. At the time of his death, his empire was the largest the world had ever seen. It stretched from the Indus River in the east to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea in the west, from the castles in the north to Nubia in the south. What emerged under Persian rule was something the ancient world had never seen before. 3 continents connected through a single administrative system. This wasn't just about territory, it was about coordination. Roads stretched across vast distances, linking cities, cultures, and economies. At the heart of it all was a communication network so efficient that even the Greeks, often rivals of Persia, admired it openly. They described the imperial couriers with a phrase that still resonates today: neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness could stop them from completing their mission. Those same words are now engraved on the main building of the United States Postal Service in New York City, a modern tribute to a system first perfected in the Persian Empire of the 5th century BCE. After the death of Cyrus the Great, his son Cambyses II expanded the empire even further. In 525 BCE, he conquered Egypt and assumed the title of pharaoh, bringing the Nile Valley under Persian control. With that, the empire grew into an even larger and more diverse entity. But it was the next ruler, Darius I, who truly reshaped the empire into a highly organized and sophisticated state. He didn't just rule conquered lands, he structured them. Darius divided the empire into provinces known as satrapies, each governed by a satrap who answered directly to the king. Yet within that framework, local traditions, laws, and languages were preserved. It was centralized control without cultural erasure. He also commissioned the construction of Persepolis, a ceremonial capital designed to reflect the scale and diversity of the empire. Even in ruins, it remains one of the most striking archaeological sites in modern-day Iran. Darius pushed innovation even further. He initiated a canal project linking the Nile River to the Red Sea, a precursor to the much later Suez Canal. He standardized weights and measures across the empire, introduced a unified legal structure, and established Aramaic as the administrative lingua franca. This allowed vastly different cultures to communicate and function within a single governing system. Yet, even under such strong leadership, the empire faced setbacks, most famously in its conflicts with the Greek world. These clashes, known as the Greco-Persian Wars, would later be remembered as defining moments in Western history. In 490 BCE, Persian forces crossed the Aegean Sea and landed at Marathon, just 40 kilometers from Athens. What followed became legendary. Despite being outnumbered, the Athenians defeated the Persian army in a battle that would echo through history. According to tradition, a messenger ran the distance back to Athens to announce the victory, collapsing upon arrival, a story that inspired the modern marathon race. But there's an important perspective often overlooked. Marathon was a tactical defeat for Persia, not a strategic collapse. At that time, the Persian Empire still controlled a vast portion of the known world. Greece, by contrast, was a fragmented collection of small, often competing city-states on the empire's edge. Darius died before he could launch a second campaign. That responsibility fell to his son, Xerxes I, who initiated another invasion roughly a decade later. Ancient sources describe his army in enormous numbers, likely exaggerated, but even conservative estimates confirm it was one of the largest military forces assembled in the ancient world. Xerxes I did burn Athens even though the population had evacuated in time. The Acropolis was destroyed, leaving a lasting mark on the city. Yet, despite this devastation, the battles at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea halted Persian expansion in Europe. Xerxes returned to Persia, leaving Greece unconquered. What few people emphasize is what happened after his return. Back in Persepolis, Xerxes lived for another 21 years. The Persian Empire remained the largest political entity in the world. The wars in Greece were just one chapter in a vast, complex history. When Aeschylus wrote The Persians, one of the earliest surviving tragedies in history, he did not depict the Persians as monsters. Instead, he presented them as humans, mourning their children, grieving their dead, and suffering the consequences of a ruler's unchecked ambition. That perspective, coming from the side that won, is extraordinary. The Persian Empire endured for more than 200 years, from Cyrus the Great to the conquest of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE. When Alexander reached Persepolis, he set it on fire. Some historians argue this was deliberate revenge for Athens. Others see it as a tragic mistake that he later regretted. Yet Alexander was captivated by Persian civilization. He adopted Persian customs, married a Persian princess, and wore Persian attire. He attempted to blend Greek and Persian cultures into something entirely new. His generals often saw this as a betrayal of Greek identity, but Alexander had grasped a truth that Cyrus understood centuries earlier. Empires that endure are not those that destroy what they conquer, but those that integrate it. The Persian legacy did not end with Alexander.
Centuries later, the Parthians revived Iranian traditions, and the Sassanids built a second Persian Empire that lasted 4 centuries. It rivaled Rome and Byzantium, preserved Greek philosophy when Europe had largely forgotten it, and remained the dominant power in the Near East until the rise of Islam in the 6th century CE. Even then, Persian identity endured. Language, culture, and collective memory survived. Islamic Persia produced giants of literature and science. Rumi, a Persian poet, Avicenna, a Persian philosopher, and Omar Khayyam enriched the world. Today, Iran carries the legacy of that ancient people. Its name means land of the Aryans, reflecting a lineage that began in a mountainous corner of the world, yet gave rise to the first serious attempt to govern human diversity with a measure of respect. There is one final detail that captures the essence of this story better than any analysis. In the British Museum in London, a small display case holds a small clay cylinder, about 23 centimeters long, covered in cuneiform inscriptions. This is the Cyrus cylinder, a tangible reminder of a ruler who reimagined conquest not as domination, but inclusion and dignity.